Imagine this room, but without the lights, without the stage, the seats, or the people. As dark as the depths of the cosmos. Silent like the underworld. But waiting for a single voice. Will it bring light into the dark? Can it even raise the dead? Will that voice be yours? My friends, there once stood a boy on this earth, silent as a planet shot through space. He spoke, but he had no voice. He knew that without a voice, his time here meant nothing. That boy was me. He wanted more. He understood that his single life, this tiny speck of time in the entire history of the universe, was his one and only chance to be the light in the dark. He needed charisma. And my friends, if you want to be one of the brave and the brilliant, to live a life that's epic, then charisma is the best way to make that happen. What is charisma? Well, charisma is one of those words that everyone seems to have their own definition of. And so for the purposes of our conversation today, we're going to use my personal definition, which is the ability to command attention in order to achieve a positive outcome. Charisma matters because it connects you with people. It galvanizes the people and the resources that you need in order to do the things that you care about. It can change your life. And I know that for a fact because I lived for decades, without any charisma at all, even though I knew that I needed it. My mom was a factory worker. My dad, an ex-military man. They had the firm belief that my voice was not important enough to be heard. And so, I took a hint and kept my mouth shut. But when I did speak, after living like this for years, my voice was boring, bureaucratic, angry. It wasn't until I heard the story of the most charismatic man who ever lived, a story from Greek myth, which I have loved ever since I was a little boy, that I found my charisma. And once you know his story and understand it, you're going to be able to find your charisma too. The name of this charismatic Olympian was Orpheus. I could relate to Orpheus. Like me, Orpheus was biracial. However, unlike me, Orpheus was the child of a mortal king and a goddess. With his trusty lyre in hand, Orpheus became known throughout the ancient world for his amazing songcraft, his powerful stage presence, and his beautiful voice. If there had been such thing as ancient Greek idol, y'all, Orpheus would have won. But that's not why we remember Orpheus thousands of years later. And the fact that we don't remember any of those performances says something very important about charisma. It says what it is not. The first step to becoming charismatic is to shatter your myths about charisma. Charisma isn't just being entertaining. It's not being loud or dramatic. It's not even having a huge personality. I had none of those things. And even as I learned to be those things, they weren't what made me charismatic. Not by a long shot. In order to understand what made me charismatic, let's get back to Orpheus. Orpheus' life changed overnight when he fell in love with a beautiful woman named Eurydice. Eurydice was a total free spirit, the sort of person that would go dancing barefoot in the meadow all afternoon just because she loved the sunlight. How could Orpheus not love her? And on the day of their wedding, as Orpheus strummed his lyre so joyfully, Eurydice did exactly that. She danced barefoot in the meadow. Imagine Orpheus' shock as her bare feet landed on a nest of vipers. Imagine his horror as she collapsed to the ground, instantly dead. Imagine his silence as he took it all in. During my many years as an attorney and as a senior executive, I thought I'd found my charisma. I spoke the company line with confidence and energy. But when the chips were down and my career collapsed on my head overnight, I felt just like Orpheus. Silenced. With everything that mattered gone. It was as though I were Eurydice. Dead. And my voice dead with me. For Orpheus, the loss of Eurydice was so overpowering that it demanded action. And so Orpheus gathered all of his strength and began the most audacious journey that any human being has ever undertaken. He found a long, dark tunnel. He took it all the way down to the underworld. He was determined to share a pointed message with Hades, the Lord of the dead. A world without Eurydice was not a world worth existing. Eurydice needed to come back from death. Eventually, Orpheus found himself before the throne of Hades. Hades stared at him, his eyes cold, pitiless, without mercy. But Orpheus took a deep breath. In that moment, he connected the message in his brain with every pound of feeling in his heart and every ounce of blood, too. He poured it into his song. Charisma flooded out. Hades and the demons of hell itself all began to weep. Orpheus, Hades said, I have heard your message, and I feel your pain. I shall release Eurydice. She may return to the land of the living. There's just one teeny tiny little condition. Well, we're going to talk about that condition in just a minute. But before we get to that, let's discuss what this portion of the story teaches. The second step to becoming charismatic, after shattering your myths about charisma, is to connect the message in your brain, complete with a clear and compelling call to action, with the full range of emotions in your heart. Then, it's time to take a risk, face your fear of failure, and let every single one of those emotions flow. Once you connect brain to heart, charisma will gush forth. I'm living proof. Although it was hard and it took a lot of work, once I began to do that, almost without trying, my own charisma began to emerge. Orpheus, Hades continued, Eurydice may follow you back to the upper world. However, you may not look back until you both are under the light of the sun. And so Orpheus began his long walk home. As he trudged up that dark tunnel, doubt began to creep into his mind. What if Hades was a liar? What if the god was a scam artist? What if Eurydice had never left the underworld at all? And so, just as Orpheus felt the very first rays of the sun, he couldn't help himself. He looked back. And there Eurydice stood, silent for a single moment as a tear sliced down her cheek. And then she was gone. When I first began to share my message about Greek myths, Orpheus, and the power of charisma, I had my doubts. Would people understand what I was saying? Would they think I was ridiculous? Would my entire career end up in Hades? But as hard as it was, no matter what happened, I could not look back. You too may fear that your own voice will get lost in the endless expanse of space and time. But once you find your charisma, what was empty and dead can become something that's brave and brilliant. Shatter your myths about charisma. Connect the brain to the heart. And never, ever look back. Because I want your future to be epic.